Welcome back to the Munn Avenue Muse podcast presented to you by Munn Avenue Press. That's MUNN, avenuepress.com. We publish books for authors from around the world. In fact, this morning I was on with an author in the United Arab Emirates, which is kind of interesting. So if you have a book in you or need some help with publishing or promoting an existing book, please feel free to reach out to munavenuepress.com. And I am so delighted today to welcome an author who I've had the pleasure of working with over the last several months, Ginger Wakem. We recently published a book for her called Trust No One, Promise Nothing. And Ginger is a fourth generation Floridian. She grew up in South Florida. Her love for books led her from mystery novels to historical romance and spy stories. She began her writing by crafting tales for her children and even expanded her career into making contributions to a BBC documentary on Tourette's syndrome and various other writing projects. Her nonfiction book is now in its third printing in English and Spanish. And she recently shared with me this amazing book of photography based in the Florida Keys. It's magnificent. Show us the cover again and that interior page.
This is the cover. It was just taken during a storm. And this is my son-in-law sitting here. And he's from Chicago, and he had never been to the Keys before, let alone saw a storm like this. And this is the other side of that storm.
Wow. And show us the picture on the water again, too.
Okay. And in the book, I use 2 pages. It is museum quality paper, and they lay flat. So there's not that big bubble in the middle of it. But I use 2 pages 3 times in the book, in the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. But that's a day on the water in the Keys with the big clouds and the little red boat.
Cool. That's cool. Now, for those who are listening on audio, just trust me, they're really beautiful. If you're watching on video, which you can get on YouTube or Substack, you can see some of these pictures of Conch Key, Florida. Conch Key.
Yeah. Mile marker 63 on the way to Key West. That's the island. It's just about 16 acres. And this is the end of the day. The book really has a theme. It's like walk with me around the island for the day. And then at the end of the day, you end up back at home. But just to know that the state-of-the-art tropical lobster trap manufacturing plant and storage facility.
We have that too.
That's how they make them, and that's how they store them right on the side of the road.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, the homes in the Keys are on that little island are all very colorful and very artsy. And so it was fun to just over the years capture pictures of them and then go through all those pictures and figure out which ones I was going to save and which one I wasn't. So
yeah, they're terrific.
Fun. Thanks.
So you are a multi-talented person for sure. Well, today I want to learn more from Ginger about her inspiration and what's behind her latest mystery mafia romance thriller, if we can call it that. Ginger, welcome. I'm so happy you could join us today.
Well, thank you. I'm very, very happy to be here.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit about your background, which might include your passion for photography and how that led up to your writing your latest book.
Wow. Well, the passion for photography was I was always had a camera in my hand when I was a kid, but I never really realized it until I looked back over some pictures, family pictures, and saw, wow, where'd I get that camera from? I think I was always probably picking up mom's camera or something. And when we got back from a trip to Alaska, I was trying to put together a scrapbook. And it seemed that all of my photographs were far better than the little postcards that I had bought along the way. And so that just encouraged me to do something with it. Um, and one of the things that did happen to me that sort of pushed me more in that direction was when we first bought this house was 22 years ago, and we hadn't even unpacked yet. So I wasn't all that familiar with sliding doors and what was open and what was closed. And I walked into a sliding door and suffered a concussion and detached the retina in one eye. So we weren't able to save it. And I was doing a lot of auditing work at for our business. And so looking at Excel sheets and doing all those little bitty figures just was no longer something I could do. It was painful to, I would come home with really bad headaches. So my husband said, well, why don't you do something with photography because you're so good? And so I did. I joined some photography groups and started entering in contests and started winning. And so that led me to just like telling stories through a lens. And that was fun for a long time. But it came to a point where the hurricanes started interrupting our lives. And when that happened, that took me in a whole nother direction.
Well, when you say took you in another direction, and what was the other direction?
When Irma hit, uh, there was there was a lot of damage to our landscape. One of the things that we do is we are gardeners, and we are on an acre of land on the water, and it's just a beautiful piece of property. And we've cultivated into these gorgeous gardens, but Irma just ripped through everything. And so we decided that before we put it back together, we were just going to change it to putting in walkways and patios and pergolas and make it even better than it was before. So we had to work all the way through the winter and into the spring, and I was exhausted from all the outdoor work. But then I started having these dreams, and these dreams were people in my head telling me stories at night that it was like I would wake up and say, I can't even get back to sleep. There's all these people talking in my head. Am I going crazy? What's going on here? And so night after night, there would be these arguments between Grace trying to tell me her story and Ray interrupting, saying his story was far more interesting than hers. And so finally, just one Sunday afternoon, I told my husband, I said, if I don't get these out of my head, I'm never going to sleep well again until they stop telling me these stories. He said, go ahead, start writing. And so I did. I just sat down at my computer and turned on Word and started getting their voices out of my head and onto paper. And that's when I did a complete turnaround and began writing a book. And I never would have woke up one day and said, oh, today I'm going to write a book. It was just sort of forced on me by my muse. I didn't even know what a muse was, but I learned really quick what it was. So now I pay attention when those voices in my head tell me I need to write something because I do.
Well, that's interesting, and
Yeah.
really, yeah, in a way, you had to write it, right? It
Hmm.
wasn't like,
They weren't
okay,
going to leave me alone.
I'm going to. That's sort of as opposed to saying, well, I want to write a book. What should I write about? You didn't have that problem. This was the
Out of the
story.
blue.
The story it wants to tell itself, and
Yes,
you were going to be the midwife for that story, right?
absolutely.
You were going to bring it out. Yeah, that's really
And
interesting.
the thing was, is I'd always written nonfiction. You know, before I even met my husband, I worked in the legal field. I wrote letters. I wrote, you know, legal documents. And then always with like when I documented my son's journey with Tourette's, that was a documentation. It was, this is the facts and the truth. And then when we opened up our business, it was all marketing plans and website content, magazine articles, all nonfiction. I never considered myself to be a fiction writer. I told stories to my children when they were little, made up fun things for them, and took a children's writing course with what Children's Institute or something. But that was a long time ago. There was no internet then. We did everything through the mail. Um, but to write a novel, fiction, just never occurred to me that that was something that I would be interested in doing. But here we are.
Yeah, yeah, and it's gratifying to do that, isn't it? Didn't it
It
feel
is.
good to get those stories out?
It, absolutely. And the thing is that when you have these people telling you their stories, you have to give them background. And we were up in Tampa going through the museums there, and then the top floor of the museum was all devoted to the mafia. And of course, then here's a wealth of information about people transporting things back and forth. And it's like, wow, okay, well, there's a whole line of work I can tap into. So I never thought that I'd write a book about the mafia. I mean, I enjoyed The Godfather, but to sit down and write something about them, that was not something that I thought I would ever do. So it just was all just came to me naturally.
Yeah, and also of interest is that, I mean, your book is quite great. I mean, it's a very captivating story, and it was an Amazon #1 bestseller in the mafia romance category. And when I mentioned this to somebody else, they said mafia romance, and it turns out this is a big category.
It
You have a
really
lot of
is.
competition in that category.
Yes.
And it may be something, along the lines of The Godfather, where there's a kind of thrilling thing about, well, it's a crime family. There's moral quandaries, there's tension. There's almost a Romeo and Juliet aspect to this, right? That
There is.
in the story. Yeah. So, and I think I may have mentioned this before on an earlier podcast, but well, what time of day do you do your writing mostly, would you say?
Oh my gosh. Well, since I'm retired, I can write anytime I want to. And when I was first writing this book, I would get up at 4 in the morning because they wouldn't leave me alone. So I would get up and start writing at 4, and probably about 7:30, I could go back to sleep for maybe an hour or two and then get back up and then at it again. So I would just write around the clock
Yeah,
whenever I mean, I just was obsessed with getting that on the paper. And I had to learn to write fiction. Writing nonfiction is just putting down the facts.
right.
Writing fiction is colorful, and you have to learn that there's an art to it.
Well,
So
there's
that,
also you're making up the characters, right?
yes,
You're creating the characters, you're creating the scenes, although they're likely based on actual locations. But um, yeah, the fascinating thing that I found, and you said this, you got up at 4 in the morning because your dreams were forcing you to.
mm-hmm,
And I found that my best writing time is in the morning. And I hadn't really thought about why that was the case until I heard a talk by Walter Mosley, who said, who's written 30 plus books, uh, terrific writer, won the National Book Award. And he said he did his writing in the morning because it was closest to his dreams. And you are a perfect example of that.
exactly.
Now, and I've written 4 thrillers with my writing. I wouldn't say that my inspiration came from my dreams, but definitely the characters and situations come from somewhere deep in my unconscious somewhere. I generally don't remember my dreams terribly well, but the books are definitely derived from that too. Who's the main character in your novel, and what can you tell us about that character?
His name is Ray, and he was switched at birth with his half brother, and then raised by just a terrible Appalachian family, and finally comes into his true self and life through some tragedies. Um, and so he has a big quandary about what's right and what's wrong, and being forced to do things that were wrong when he was a young boy. Um, and so I had to work all those little pieces out of him understanding on a normal basis what's right and what's wrong, and then being protective of his little sisters and his what he calls Ma, which is the woman who stole him, who kidnapped him, and switched him with her child so that her child would be raised in the rich family. I don't want to get into too much of it, but he has some deep feelings of between good and evil, and he has to work that out because he's a murderer. I mean, he's in the mafia. He kills people. He doesn't kill people who he's not hired to kill people, and it's usually it's just someone who attacks him first. But in the mafia, you don't kill anybody without permission. So there's that too.
So he's it's interesting because he's your protagonist, right? He's not the villain per se, but he does some terrible things.
Well, he has to, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he does.
And you know, I sort of gleaned this early on in my own writing, and that is villains. Well, there's a saying: the villain is the hero of his own story.
That's so true.
And you know, the interesting villains are the ones that are not two-dimensional. You know, they're all bad. The interesting villains are the ones that have doubts, that have people they care about, people that might care about them, but they have issues. We'll put it
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Is there a paragraph or two from your books that you might be willing to read and share with us?
Ooh, I had to think about that one. Like there was, without getting into too much detail, something that would be simple to just understand, but to set, I did. I figured it out this morning. I always just let my subconscious work on it. And when I go to sleep at night, I say, okay, tomorrow morning when I wake up, you're going to find this for me. And that happens a lot when I'm writing. Is if I'm writing into a corner and I don't know where I'm going with it, I just say, well, I'll figure it out in my sleep. And I always do. I always wake up and go, I know where I'm going now. So,
Well, that's, I want to talk about that for a minute before you read that
all right.
passage, which is writing yourself into a corner. What, and I've had that experience more than once, but talk about what that means. What does that mean, writing yourself into a
Well,
corner?
I'm a pantser, not a plotter. So I just write what is coming to me. And when I get to a point where I honestly don't know what's going to happen next, I've run out of energy and focus and any more thoughts about it, I know it's time to stop and just let my brain work on it in the background because it does. And
And
then when
solve the problem
it
in a way.
does, it does. And I fully trust that it will. So I just go to bed and say, okay, tomorrow.
I've
Or,
had the same experience, but and for me, writing into a corner also meant not just maybe running out of steam, but um, if you write as a pantser, which is a term that we use in writing for writing without an outline, by the
mm-hmm,
seat of your pants,
by the
so to
seat of your
speak.
pants. Yeah.
Writing into a corner might mean that your plot gets stuck with some inconsistency or something that you can't readily figure out. So when I experienced that with my first novel, I happened to be at a conference and CJ Box was there, who's quite well known. And I asked him, I said, how do you avoid or dealing with writing yourself into a corner? And the way he avoids it is he writes 100-page outline. So it's quite detailed. That's the way he avoids it. So I
Yeah.
thought about that and I said, okay. But um, I subsequently heard Ann Patchett talk about this, who is a pantser
Mm-hmm.
and does not write 100-page outlines. And she said, not knowing what's going to happen next as an author writing the book transfers that experience to the reader.
Mm-hmm.
So the reader is going on the journey with the writer, and the reader doesn't know what's going to happen next either
Oh,
because the writer
right.
hasn't figured it out yet. So
Right.
it makes it much more exciting in a way for the reader to read that kind of, you know, I wouldn't call it unstructured, but that unresolved
Issue. Yeah.
storyline,
Yeah.
and figuring out how to get out of the corner becomes part of that adventure. So
It does.
writing into the corner is not necessarily a bad thing, which was my
No.
first impression.
Yeah. It's not at all a bad
Uh,
thing.
Now, it challenges you as a writer to resolve it, but it also brings the reader along on that excursion. So I thought that was really kind of interesting. And you and I hadn't really talked about this before,
No.
but my process is very akin to your process.
Right.
And I've tried, I'm a student of the whole outlining process because I keep trying to figure out, is there a better way? Right. So
Mm-hmm.
with my first book was totally sat down in the morning, nothing in my head other than what I wrote yesterday, and off I go. And by the way, Lee Child writes that way
Yeah.
too. So this
Yeah.
isn't it's not an amateur
It's a
thing per se.
daily journey.
So authors all have their different approaches. So C.J. Box writes 100-page outline and then essentially writes his book over the top of the outline.
Yeah.
With my second book, my first book was Not So Dead. My second book was Not So Gone. I decided, okay, in the interest of trying to write this more quickly, I'm going to spend a month writing a really detailed outline, which I did. It was maybe 60 pages. And I also did these storyboards with post-it notes, and I like got really organized. And then I landed up writing it by the seat of my pants anyway. And it took me extra time because I had, yeah. And then the third way that I thought was really quite interesting is I've gotten to know David Morrell a little bit. Most people have never heard of David Morrell, but they know his iconic character, which he was the inventor and creator, the father of Rambo.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
So everybody knows Rambo. It's
Of
like one of
course.
the
Yes.
top 5 iconic characters of the
Characters.
20th century. And what he does is when he has an idea for a book, he writes himself a letter.
Oh,
The
okay.
letter is, Dear David, I have this idea for a book. It takes
Mm-hmm.
place in southern Nevada, and there is this thing going on the horizon. It's like chimeric, and people around aren't quite sure what this phenomenon is. By the way, he did write a book like this called Shimmers, I think it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's kind of this spooky thing on the horizon. And so he writes this letter in pretty good detail. It turns out to be like a 25-page letter. And then when he's done, he does something very important, which I think a lot of writers don't do. He looks at this letter and says, do I want to spend my next year writing this book?
Mm-hmm.
Is this a good story?
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes putting it aside is the best thing you can do. But if he likes what he wrote, then he says, okay, I'm going to write the book. And now I have a 25-page outline.
Right.
So that was appealing to me. So I tried that with my third book. I
Mm-hmm.
got about 15 pages into my Dear Charlie letter. And then I said, I got to just start writing. Yeah, it's a good book. I'm just going to start writing.
Oh, you
So
were already in love with the idea, so you
yeah,
went ahead. Yeah.
I'm going.
Yeah.
I don't have patience for this
Uh,
anymore. I'm going to start writing. So, but with that, I'm not don't want to steal your thunder here. I really would love you to read the passage that you
well, let me just
picked.
back up for one more second and just say what I do when I get to that corner and I don't know where I'm going. I realize that to go past this point, I haven't dropped enough hints in the background. So to
Ah,
get beyond that corner, I've got to go back and feed information into either some other characters or some other uh, place, position, location, something that can help this character get out of this situation because there's already something back there that's pointing in another direction. And so
yeah.
that's how I got out of quite a few of them was just to go back and drop the hints that I needed to drop so that I could go forward and get out of the corner.
Oh, well, then yeah, that absolutely. And I've got to add a comment about going back. And by the way, we're building tensions with our listeners who really want to hear your passage. so
You
so
have to
it's
wait.
it's like there's going to be a commercial. You got to wait till the next part. So um, but the going back is really interesting to me because you might have to go back for a number of reasons. Well, A, you're going to go back to edit and review,
Of
and you're going to
course.
refine and do all that.
Of course.
And what you're saying is, I'm going back to correct some or set up the plot points for what I'm going forward. I'll give you another reason that I went back is when my third book, Not So Done, was about to come out. It was March of 2020, if I have this right. And I had written about a pandemic, but it was one that was started by a terrorist.
Oh,
Um, and the book was ready to go to publish when the COVID-19 pandemic hit.
yep.
So I had to go back and say, okay, now what do I do with this?
Hmm.
Because there's a real pandemic.
Yeah.
And I went back. I decided not to take it out, but to keep it in and modify it to match kind of the current time
Hmm.
and published the book that way. And I've been told many times that what I've written is sort of predicts the future.
Hmm.
And what I wrote into that book after it was published 6 months later. In that book, there was an attack on the Capitol,
Oh my God.
which happened 6 months
Oh,
later.
jeez.
So it's funny about going back and,
Yeah.
in a way, while you're writing the plot, it's a living thing. It
Hmm.
changes, it morphs,
It
the
does.
story changes. Even when you come up with an ending, you might have to go back and change things to support the ending, which I've
Hmm.
I've had that experience too. All
Yeah.
right, we won't hold our listeners up any longer.
Okay.
Please
Here,
read that passage.
here is the setup. Ray is barely 19 years old, and he's delivering wine from his father's West Virginia vineyards to a restaurant in Seaport, Florida, when he's introduced to a local businessman, Marco Catnetti Sr., and his son, Junior, unaware that they're mafia. Ray accepts their offer to earn cash his father doesn't need to know about if he uses his empty truck to deliver the Catnetti's products to various locations on his way back north. He's paid when he picks up the products, and he's tipped again when he delivers the products, but is instructed not to get out of the truck at any time. He is only the driver. After many successful deliveries, he learns just how dangerous these deliveries can be. So this is where I picked up at. So
Okay.
now I have to change my glasses. Hold on. What? Oh, crap. Now you're going to have to cut that one out. Here. One night I drove into a dimly lit, fenced, seedy New Jersey warehouse with only one way in, a gate I'd just inched through. When the hackles rose on the back of my neck, I turned my truck around to face the open gate and left my engine running while the product was unloaded. When my truck's back doors slammed shut, but the tip money wasn't pushed through my side window within the normal time frame, I got a creepy feeling and flipped open my switchblade, angling my body toward the door. Not even 10 seconds later, my driver's door was snatched open and a dark figure lunged towards me, only to be greeted by my knife slicing his throat open. He dropped to the ground, making choking sounds as I slammed on the gas and, with all four tires screeching, sped through the gate. Had he been successful at pulling me out of my truck, I might have been a goner. Alarmed that my personal protection skills were lacking, I hired our field hands to teach me how to fight with a knife. I was truly impressed watching their footwork when they fought, usually over a woman. At the end of the day, when their work was done, using sticks as knives, they taught me to shuffle around my opponent, lunge, duck, and strike at the first opportunity. Jose Sr. interpreted their advice. If you are the first to draw blood, the fight may end quicker. Even with my newly gained abilities, I considered quitting, delivering for the Catnettis. When they got wind of it, they increased their already generous cash bonuses and promised a swift and harsh punishment to anyone who attempted to attack me or my truck ever again. Franco, who had become my best friend, advised me to move my tip box to the rear end of the truck. His brother, Junior, frowned and added harshly, "Get a gun and learn to use it." Months later, on my first trip to Philadelphia, I found myself in another tense situation. I missed the exit road to the warehouse district and was far behind schedule when I pulled into the warehouse's drop-off zone. The dark, seedy surroundings were alarming. First, I scanned the area with my headlights on high beam. Then I circled around and pointed my truck's nose towards the exit, leaving my high beams on. With my motor running and the cab doors locked, my loaded pistol sat next to me. When my truck's back doors slammed shut and the warehouse's doors rolled down, I put my truck in gear and inched forward. That's when a large man stepped in front of my truck with a shotgun, pointed at my windshield, and shouted at me to get out. Gunning it hard, I slammed into him, knocking him under the truck. I then felt a sickening bump as my tires rolled over the imbecile, squashing his skull like a ripe melon. I stepped up my fighting lessons. When Father asked why, I mentioned the hijacking attempts, but left out that I killed both men. Concerned, he installed a punching bag in the garage and started my boxing lessons. When I revealed I had purchased a handgun for protection and admitted I needed practice, Father then set up a target area and taught me to be deadly accurate, sharing a brilliant piece of advice. Never point a gun at someone to threaten them. Use it to kill them.
Oh,
So that
oh,
is the young man before he takes the vow of omerta, which is where the book opens, is him taking the vow of omerta.
wow. Yeah. Well, if you like thrilling mystery stories with action, romance, and intrigue, um, do pick up a copy of Trust No One, Promise Nothing by Ginger Wakem, which is on, you can find it on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com. Your local bookstore can order it for you. It's all around. And the interview's not over. I just wanted to let people know they can get that book. And your passage makes me, I think, would make anyone want to read it even more. Ray sounds like quite a character. Um, yeah, so interesting. So, any thoughts on writing another book?
Oh, funny you should say that. I mean, I'm getting a lot of emails and requests from friends saying, what happens next? Where are we going? What happens? Where are we going? Who are you going to write about next?" And I'm like, well, I have about 50 pages of John the detective and his life in West Palm Beach as a on the sheriff's department, dealing with his lover Nora, and who's a very rich woman who lives in Palm Beach. Um, I'm kind of stuck there. Don't know where to go at this point. I just kind of put it down and started on a YA novel, which is set of a young man in Belize, because Peter and I did some travels to Belize, and we've been in the jungle and know quite a few stories about that. And then and then Carmelita started coming to me in my dreams saying, hey, wait, down. I didn't get any voice in that first book. You wrote around me, you wrote about me, but I didn't get to talk very much. I think you should write this whole next book from my viewpoint of what happens next. So I'm a little intrigued with that idea myself. I don't know which one my muse is going to choose, but I'm waiting to see which one she does. So
Well, yeah. Well, it's a sign that the characters in a way take on a life of their own, don't they?
they do.
When I was writing my first book, I had no intention of writing a sequel or a series for that matter. And when I got done, the characters were so real to me,
Hmm.
Sam and Monica and Rich and Michelle, that I felt I owed it to them.
Yeah.
Um, that their life and their story couldn't end here,
No.
that it had to go on. So, and I've had readers ask me, well, do the same characters go on into the next book? And my answer is always the ones that survive make it to the next book.
Absolutely. Uh,
But you know, the other advantage too when you write that sequel is you've already developed some of these characters. And an interesting comment about Carmelita, because my main character in my books is Sam Sunborn, and his wife Monica for the first three books was kind of in the background and always irritated at all the trouble he seemed to get them into.
mhm.
But in the fourth book, I said, you know, she really deserves to step into the forefront and be the hero. And
Right.
she really turns out to be the protagonist and the hero in the fourth book. So it's fun to evolve your characters that way, and in a way, maybe every character has their own story. You know, if you think of
Well,
some of the TV series you see that are shot and filmed each episode from the point of view of a different character.
mhm.
Well, I think you know there's a book in each character
There is.
if you wanted to pursue the story.
There really is.
And Florida is really an interesting, diverse, sometimes mysterious environment, right? I mean, a lot of your book takes place in Florida, right?
Yes. Yes, it
And
does.
you talked a little bit before about the hurricanes and the weather. Has that influenced your writing in any way?
Not so much influenced it, but the last hurricane that came through here, Ian, that just created so much damage and hardship, and um, it gave me a chance to stop. Well, just to say that our home and our business were both uh, wrecked from the flood, and we had a lot of damage to our landscaping. All my beautiful gardens. My Instagram has all the pictures of my gardens. They were all wiped out again. Um, so there was so much emotion that went into dealing with all the devastation that and having to move out of our house and have it gutted and floors up and walls out, all that stuff just really tears you up. But it gave me a chance to take some of that angst and put it into my characters. There was that. And then also, I was able to write and again document because that's my first, I won't say first love, but that's what I sort of grew up on is documenting. And so I documented every day on a calendar of what went on that day and how I felt about it. And so when the local Gulf Coast Writers Association formed an alliance with the Arts of Alliance group, um, they created this book called The Storm Stories, and they put out a call for people to write their stories, and I did. I documented it and wrote my story is called Redemption because that's what happens is you go through all this horrible mess and you come out on the other side and things are far more beautiful. My house is far more beautiful than it was before it was ruined by the hurricane, and life is wonderful. And so there is some redemption in going through all that pain. And if you're able to take that and write it and show that you grow as a person through all that. So I was able to not only keep writing on my book with my characters to keep focused on trust no one, but also to begin to write that documentary of what went on. So that was a lot of writing that went on because it was downtime. We were not stuck. We were living in a condominium. Um, and so I wasn't with all my normal, wash machine dryer calling you all day long. It was just you're you're you have the quality of time to spend writing then. So I did. That's
Right.
what I did.
Well, it's a great lesson in that, in your resilience and building back, but not just building back to the way it was, but to build it back even better,
Even
right?
better. Yes.
Um,
I say that there's no day that I would have ever woken up and said, today we're moving out of our house. We're going to rip up the floors and tear out the walls and make a whole new master bathroom. And That would have been crazy. I would have never done that. But it's just be careful what you wish for, because
Yeah, you had a
I
little
always
help.
I hated those white tile floors. Always hated them. So now I don't have white tile floors
So you had
anymore.
a little help with the
Yeah,
renovation, right? At
exactly.
least the demolition part of the
Well,
renovation, you
it
had
was
a
a
little help.
terrifying thing to go through, but at the same time, we did come out on better on the other end.
Oh, good for you. So what was the, you've written a book. What talk about what the publishing process was like in that whole journey?
Oh God, Charlie, thank God for you. I tell you, I got all through with a book and I was sure I was done. I knew how it was going to end. I needed help because past that point, I'm out of my bailiwick. This is not something I can do or even want to do. I did not want to take on that whole responsibility of self-publishing. So I started looking for agents and publishers, and I spent a lot of time looking, and I finally found you, and it was such a relief and such a pleasure. It's been wonderful. You've made the whole thing seamless. Developing the book cover has been fantastic.
It's a great cover.
The interior, the way they designed the interior was, I just loved it. It just was so nice. And you just walking me through every step of the marketing. You made it so easy. I mean, I have to ask questions over and over again, but I'm getting there. But thank God I didn't have to stumble through all that by myself, because I never, ever could have done the fantastic job that you've done
Well,
and
thank you.
are
Thank you.
still doing.
And we just had so much fun working with you on it. As satisfying and exciting to be publishing your book as my own books, and
Mm,
we treat them the same way. If I'm ever sort of stuck with, okay, what do we do next? I ask myself the question, well, what would I do for my own book on this?
hmm.
And that's usually the guide.
Yeah.
So we take pride in taking the personal attention, but it really helps when we have somebody wonderful like you to work with
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I feel the
with
same
a
way about your whole team has been fantastic.
with a great book too.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
yeah. Well, thank you. I know you worked a lot with Lily, who's on our team.
Darling. She's just darling. Yeah. She just sent me the Amazon A plus banner or whatever you call it. And
Right, the A
oh,
plus content that goes
yes.
on the
Oh my
page.
gosh. It's
You
just
you liked
wonderful.
it? Oh,
I
great.
loved it. I loved it. I had no criticism whatsoever. It was perfect.
Well, great. That's going up soon then too.
Good.
And that, for people that don't know what we're talking about, on your Amazon book page, when you scroll down below the description, there's an area there that we can place a graphical sort of little promotion for your book. So this, in the case of Ginger's book, there's a banner with the title Trust No One, Promise Nothing, and a little something by Ginger Wakem. And then there's three boxes with quotes, and it's just visually appealing. And Amazon has a study that if you do this, you will convert 3% to 10% more of the people who visit your book page into buyers of your book. So that's why for most of the books we do that, and you'll see some of the big publishers do that too. But yeah, oh, I'm great. I'm delighted you like that.
And they follow the format of my webpage, which is done in black, red, and white. And it's by pulling those colors in and making them on that banner, it's just perfect.
Yeah, I think it's if like you have a beautiful website, and if there's some branding angle, in a sense that your brand is part of your brand, that color scheme and those fonts,
Hmm.
we want to be consistent with that
Right.
and tie into that. And we do a lot of business books also, so that becomes frequently we'll have an author give us a brand guide, and we use
Hmm.
that and put in part to design the covers that we design. Well, I do hope you continue and write that next book because I want to read it.
Well, thank you.
And maybe we'll even have the honor and privilege to help you publish it.
Well,
And your book does carry the Munn Avenue Press imprint, which I'm
absolutely.
very proud of.
Me too.
So that's great. So I'll say it again. Trust No One, Promise Nothing by Ginger Wakem, Wakem.
Right.
Is You can just search it on Amazon, and it'll come right up. And it is available on barnesandnoble.com and many websites around the world. And most of the independent bookstores order their books from a company called Ingram, who's a printer and distributor of books, and they can easily order the book too if you want to support your local bookstore. And it may be there now, but it should appear soon on bookshop.org, which is an interesting website that supports independent bookstores.
Okay.
So when you buy a book from bookshop.org, a percentage of the revenue goes to whatever the local bookstore is
Okay.
for that. So as we do like supporting independent bookstores, all my
Hmm.
books are in my local bookstores. We want to support them too. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Ginger, for sharing your inspiration
Well,
and
thank you.
your journey. And we look forward to seeing the next book.
We'll see who wins. But
So
thank you,
this
Charlie. This has been fun. This has been a lot of
uh,
fun.
thank you for joining us. This has been Munn Avenue Muse, which you can find at munnavenuemuse.com and subscribe. And we are also on Apple and Spotify. And if you have an Echo device or an Apple phone, you can say, um, uh, Alexa or Siri, please play the last episode of the Munn Avenue Press podcast, and it will do that. And in fact, my device behind me just heard me and is starting to do it right now. Alexa, stop.
Oh,
And
fun.
if you need help with publishing your book, we do cover design, interior design, editing, proofreading. We get your ISBN numbers. We write compelling sales copy for your Amazon page. We produce audiobooks and even podcasts just like this. So tune in next time to the Munn Avenue Press, munnavenuemuse.com podcast. Thank you very much
Thank
again,
you.
Ginger.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.